Today I'm doing a sourdough for beginners video because I'm going to be talking about how to feed my sourdough starter, how often should I do it, and how should I feed it. And if you're looking to make sourdough bread, you got to start with a healthy and good sourdough starter. So a question that everyone wants to know when you get started in making sourdough bread is, how often should I feed my sourdough starter? But there's not one easy answer. The best answer I can tell you is that it should match your lifestyle. If you're someone that starts feeling overwhelmed by feeding your sourdough starter every day, then don't do it that way. But it also is going to depend on how much you bake. So if you're going to bake once a week, you can store your sourdough starter in the fridge and then you don't even have to feed it. But I recommend that you take it out at least 2 days before you're going to bake and you feed it twice a day. So I definitely recommend minimum of 3 feedings before you bake. So for me, that's morning of the day before, the night before, and the morning of my bake, and then I wait for it to rise to its peak and then I use it. So that means I can't start baking my bread until 11 o'clock because I feed it about 5 or 6 in the morning and I can't use it until about 11. So it depends on your schedule. Everybody's going to be different. That works best for me. But those 3 feedings are kind of mandatory. So if you're somebody that only wants to bake once a week, that's a great way to do it because then you're only feeding it a day or 2 days in advance, and that's it. But if you don't mind it and you want to keep it out and not in your fridge, then you have to feed it every day. Once a day is usually good, but if it's really hot in your kitchen and the warmer place that you set your starter, the faster it will eat all the food and grow, and then it'll deflate faster. So there are times that you may have to feed it more often than that, but actually it doesn't matter. Once it goes all the way down, and let's say it's like this and it's done eating its food, you could leave it that way for a day or 2 and bring it back. You can't kill your sourdough starter, by the way. You can't, so don't worry about that. Even if I left the house and I came back and 4 days later I had left it out, it's like this. It'll smell really acidic and it will seem like it's gone, but if you just feed it twice a day for 2-3 days, you have it right back. So don't worry, you can't kill it. You can't make any mistakes. You just want to do it conveniently. So my answer to you is ask yourself what feels better. If you feel like it's expensive and wasting flour, then put it in your fridge. If you really want to make sure, like I always want to really make sure that my starter's really healthy and active, so I like to feed it every day. I don't mind that. But right now the heat is here and my kitchen can get kind of warm. So sometimes what I do, and I'll show you, I feed it, and I'm going to show you right now how I feed it. And then once I see it growing to about here, I then put it in the fridge and I leave it there overnight because it stays where it is. It doesn't keep going and it doesn't deflate. And it'll take some days in the fridge to go down because it's cold in there and yeast rises very little in the cold. And then the next day I take it out and it'll continue rising. So it buys me a little time to not have to maybe feed it every single day. Do you see what I'm saying? But here's how I feed my starter. I always leave about 80 grams of starter. So this right here, I've already measured on my scale. This is 80 grams of starter. So what I want to do now is, most people say it's a 1 to 1 to 1, meaning 100 grams of starter, 100 grams of flour, 100 grams of water. I did that for a long time and it works, but for some reason the texture was one that was a bit runnier, and I like my sourdough starter. When I would see the recipes of the really good bakers, I noticed their starter was more like, almost like they could make it into a scoop or hold it on their spoon, and it wasn't just a runny. So I started experimenting myself and adding a little less starter and more flour, because flour's the food. So if I give more food, that means that the 80 grams of starter instead of 100, that 80 grams has more food than 100 grams of starter to eat the same amount of food. So I tried that and it worked fantastic. So I have 80 grams of starter, and now I'm going to put in my 100 grams of flour. So I've zeroed out my scale. Now I'm going to do the water. 100 grams water. This one you want to go a little slower because it's a little harder to get it exact. And it doesn't have to be exact, but I got it exact, 100. But sometimes it says 102 or 3, and I'm like, that's good enough. And now I just stir it around. And I want to show you the texture that I love when I make my sourdough bread. This is the texture that I'm looking for. Do you see? It's like I can hold this on my spoon. Of course, when I get the whole ball, I'm not going to be able to hold it as much, see? But that's the texture I love for my sourdough bread. I think the reason why it works better is less starter, more food. And when that amount of yeast bacteria have more food, they go crazy. And I've actually, you can see my starters here in the jar. I'll put a rubber band around here. That's always what I do. So if I take a rubber band and I say, okay, this is where my starter is starting. And then you'll see later in the day, okay, double, boom, triple. That's why I do it the way I do it, because I want the most powerful starter, because I don't use any non-natural wild yeast. I only use sourdough starter for my bread. Therefore, I want it as powerful as possible, because that's what I'm counting on to give my bread the rise. And I want one of those big balls of sourdough bread. Thank you so much. All right, see you next time.